and even deal with allergies, because the immune system, which we're going to focus on today, affects all of those aspects. But before we get into the physiology of how the immune system works, explain how the immune system works. I think I'm getting. Is that? I'm okay, good. I don't have to do anything with that. All right, you can hear me better, right? Even better. Okay, before we get into the immune system itself, I want to take a step back and address one of the things we talked about last night, and that is dealing with the mental health crisis. Do you remember? We learned that not only are there crises of chronic disease, like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity. What else is happening? Do you remember the statistic? Even if you have a vague memory of it. 1 out of 4. That's it. 1 out of 4 Americans basically suffer from a diagnosable mental illness every single year. It's actually 26.2%. That's astounding. And do you think it's getting better or worse because of all the lockdowns and the COVID, I call it hysteria, that's going on right now? It's getting worse. It's getting much worse. We don't even know the extent of mental illness that's happening right now because a lot of it is still, it's still trickling out. It's yet to be determined. But I think we're in for a pandemic of mental health issues as well coming out of this. But I believe that God has solutions to all of these things that are rather simple. And once we realize it's just like drinking water, it's so simple, and it often seems so, I don't know. Let me give you an example of this. I like to learn about natural remedies. And I heard about this natural remedy when I had the need for it, I guess. I had a terrible ear infection and earache, and I read in this natural remedies book. By the way, if you like natural remedies, you're going to learn a little bit about them today, but especially tomorrow, so please come to tomorrow's presentation. But I was reading in this book, and it said, okay, if you've got an earache, take an onion, just a little white onion, cut it in half, wrap it in aluminum foil, put it in the oven. Anyone heard of that? Okay. All right. When I read that, I thought, and here I am, I'm this registered nurse who knows all about medicine and everything, and I think, an onion? How can that? Hey, that's laughable. I started laughing when I heard about that, and I didn't use it. And I tried all these other things, and my ear infection was getting worse and worse and worse, and finally, I asked my wife, can we go to the grocery store and spend 40 cents on an onion? It was my last resort. And we got the onion, this onion, and walking around with this onion. We cut it, we put it in the oven, wrapped in aluminum foil, take it out, put it on a towel so it wouldn't burn, because it was a hot onion at that point. And so I'm just looking at this half of an onion, and the instruction said, okay, hold the onion by the ear. And I'm, okay, all right, this is uncomfortable. I'll lay down for a little bit and hold this by the ear. You know what? By about 2 minutes, the earache completely went away, and it did not come back. Okay? These things are so simple. Sometimes we underestimate the virtue of these simple remedies, yet they can be so profound. Now, here's one that I know all of us have underestimated, okay? Many of you have heard this verse before, but this is part of the solution. It is probably the solution to the mental health crisis, but a major part of the solution to the COVID crisis as well. Okay? And you don't have to have the proof yet. We're going to show how this works on a physiologic standpoint in a few minutes. But let's read this together. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. Let's read it once more, because I want you to place this in your memory. Because when we eventually get to this, light bulbs are going to go off, and you're going to realize, wow, that is amazing. This is my prediction, okay? But I think it's going to happen. It happens every time I get together with an audience and we look at this verse. It is absolutely amazing. Okay, let's read it again. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. Proverbs 17:22. There is a scripture song that goes with this, and I used to stand up in front of people and sing it, but I shied away from that because I'm not a vocalist, so I'll spare you that. But just know this is very important. It's a very important concept, okay? So, we talked about the fact that we are living in an age of viruses. And if I would have told you that, well, believe it or not, this one doesn't even have COVID on it. This was from my 5 years ago presentation. I didn't even realize this. Yeah, there were plenty of viral threats back then, but especially now, we are living in the era of the virus, aren't we? Unfortunately. COVID-19, caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which causes all sorts of strange symptoms. One of them, turns out, is immune malfunction, problems with the immune system. And you don't have to understand all of this right now. Don't worry, you'll understand what these terms mean, these cells that we're going to talk about. But I'll briefly summarize this. These are findings of immune deficiency among people with the original SARS. So this is SARS-1. We're in SARS-2. They behave somewhat similarly, though. Okay? So 47% of patients had something called leukopenia. And that's basically referring to the white blood cells being decreased. So almost half of individuals that came down with the original SARS had a depressed immune system. Do you see that? You think there's a relationship between the two? Maybe. It's possible. Okay. Lymphopenia, that means the lymphocytes, which you'll learn about those in a moment. 84% of people having low amounts of lymphocytes, a type of white blood cell. T lymphopenia, the T cells, you'll learn about those in just a minute. 95%. Helper T cells reduced in 100% of patients. Every patient had depressed helper T cells. Wonder why? What's going on here? And what does that mean? B lymphocyte levels were reduced by 76%, and natural killer cell levels were reduced in 55%. Our data suggested that these patients' immune systems were impaired during the course of SARS. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think it's also a possibility that an impaired immune system could also lead to the infection of SARS? It makes sense, doesn't it? So whether it's the cause or whether it's part of the symptoms of the actual disease process, the viral infection, it would behoove us to understand how we can work with our immune system to strengthen it. Would you agree with that? Okay. So let's examine a little bit more about the whole viral cycle to learn how our immune system can fight this. It turns out that viruses are not physically alive. They're kind of like parasites. They need you to be able to reproduce, to be able to basically exist. In fact, if there was no host, there would be no virus. It would just be a piece of protein, a genetic instruction somewhere, not doing anything at all. Kind of like if you had a computer virus on remember those, oh yeah, we'll go to the modern term, yeah. A flash drive, something, well, I don't even have one here. But, you know, the little flash drives, a computer virus there. Will it cause a problem away from a computer? No. You leave it around your children, it won't harm anything, right? It's not going to do any damage unless it's plugged into the computer, right? That's the same thing with a virus. What will happen here is if you're susceptible to a virus, let's say I think this is influenza right here. The influenza virus comes in contact with your cell, it becomes enveloped into the cell, it splits this thing called the vesicle, and it dumps genetic instruction in your cell. You know what genetic instruction tells the cell to do? Build something. It's kind of like, anyone ever watch a child build Legos? And they've got this instruction on how to build this set. Well, genetic instruction is it is instruction on how the cell itself is to build components of the cell or build chemicals that affect the cell. In fact, everything the cell does is written there in the instruction, in the DNA. So when the virus comes in, it gives the cell its own instruction, and it basically forces, it's kind of like a hijacker. It forces the cell to make something it wants the cell to make. In this instance, it's making itself. And I've always said viruses are very selfish. You know, they're only concerned about themselves. They come into the environment and they cause so much problems that eventually this cell is going to die. They hijack the machinery that builds protein, the ribosomes, and they make more of themselves, and then they bud off, or the cell eventually explodes, one of the two, and then you have new viruses going throughout. And this cell will probably die right here. So viruses are ruthless. And the more infective the virus is, the more dangerous, the more ruthless it's acting. Some viruses will even, as I'm going to explain in just a moment, they'll even hide inside here from the immune system. And they'll use the cell's own mechanisms to hide from the virus. It's very devious, very sinister plot these viruses have going on. But God has not left us without an opportunity to overcome these threats. What is that called? Our immune system. Our immune system. In fact, I believe that our immune system is fully capable of attacking and defending against any viral, bacterial, or fungal threat known to man. It just has to be functioning properly. It's when these things are not functioning properly, that's when we start to have trouble. So I want to introduce you to a number of your major immune system players. And I like to think of ourselves as generals of the army within. Each one of you are a general, you know that? And we'll go ahead and call you 5-star generals, okay? Because you're the commander-in-chief, I guess, maybe even better. You're the president of your body. And you will, the choices that you make will affect how these soldiers fight. And I'll explain how that happens as we go through each of these cells. But before we do that, I want to explain what this chart is all about. This cell right here is a stem cell. Anyone heard of stem cells before? Okay. Stem cells are nothing more than a cell that is capable of turning into other types of cells. In this case, this stem cell, the hematopoietic stem cell, is capable of turning into all of these blood cells and platelets as well. Could turn into red blood cells, platelets, basophil, neutrophil, eosinophil, monocyte, T lymphocyte, or B lymphocyte, and even natural killer cell right here. So that cell is very important, isn't it? It's so important that God placed an armor protection around it. And there are more than just one. You know where that armor is? It's the bone. You think of the bone. If there was something that needed to be protected, God put bone around it, right? He protected the abdominal, the abdominal cavity has some protection, but mainly the thoracic cavity, right? The heart and the lungs. Those are very well protected by the rib cage. But even more so, the brain, right? It's encased in this armor. Well, these cells are encased in this armor in the red bone marrow. So where do the stem cells come from that make the, not only the immune system, but red blood cells and platelets? They come from everyone? From the bones, right? From the bone marrow. Everyone understand that? It's very important that you understand that before we move on. Where do the immune cells come from? Bone marrow, okay? That's where they all have their common ancestry. Okay, so now we can move on here, and we'll examine a few of these cells. These are your major soldiers of your immune system army. And we'll go through and look at each one. And don't worry, you don't have to memorize the names. I know sometimes, it's like a different language, Don't worry too much about that. Just understand that you will play a part in what the neutrophil does in a very simple way, okay? But let's talk about the neutrophil. He's kind of like your policeman or your first responder. There are many neutrophils in circulation. In fact, I forget the prevalence, I have it in my notes here, 62% of white blood cells in circulation in a normal individual, a person that's not sick or infected with a virus or having severe allergies. In a normal individual, 62% of all white blood cells are neutrophils. So they're probably important, right? Because they're the prevailing soldier in your immune system army. Why are they so important? Well, consider this. How many of you have ever gotten a splinter before? Anyone? Okay, only 2 people. 3. Okay. All right. Well, for all of you who have had a splinter or a scrape or you've had an abrasion to the skin, neutrophils have come to your rescue. And this is the reason why. Because with that puncture, in this case it's a splinter, there are things that are, unless somehow that splinter was sterilized prior to the puncture, which I doubt, you have bacteria or fungus introduced into this wound. So what has to happen? Well, the bacteria, if they're disease-causing or pathogenic, they can multiply and they can cause cellular death in that area. So the neutrophil has to come in, and it's really amazing how they operate. Wish I could use I can't really see that. It's amazing how they operate. So this is a blood vessel right here, and a very small blood vessel at that. But these neutrophils will squeeze through in between the cells, they'll squeeze through and come over into the area where the bacteria are located, and they will start to eat the bacteria. They'll produce these chemicals, this is also part of the cellular damage itself. They'll produce these chemicals that will call other immune cells to the area. These are a form of interleukin. And I have this back here. I'll go back for a moment. Here it is. Okay, it's interleukin number 8. Interleukin is a chemical messenger that communicates between white blood cells. This is just the number 8 variety. What it does with that interleukin 8 is it's kind of like, you would hear about the police radio dispatch, and all cars alert, right? Or a, 4-alarm fire? I'm sorry, I'm not a fireman. But it's one of those major alerts where everyone comes in, right, and helps out. Well, the neutrophil does that. When it recognizes a threat, it goes in and it calls for backup. It says, I'm going in. It secretes this interleukin 8, and it calls all of his friends in as well. And they call in all their friends. And all of a sudden, you have a group that's so amassed, it looks white. Ever heard of pus? That's neutrophil, right? Those are neutrophils. Millions of them, potentially. Some people think, wow, especially when you're a teenager, oh, I've got this pimple growing over here. I really cannot stand this thing, Why do I have to get pimples? Next time, I hope you never look at a pimple the same way again. A pimple is a blessing. It's a miracle of nature, okay? There are things you can do to reduce the prevalence of pimples, yes. But, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but that pimple, the pus that's forming there are neutrophils that have said, we are going to go in and clean out the bacteria that are causing problems here. And, understand this, and we are dedicating the rest of our existence to this threat right here. They will stay there and fight until the battle is done and they die. They lay down their lives for you. And this is something that is characteristic throughout the immune response. These cells, if they're just lying around dormant, they can live for years, maybe decades. But when they become active, they usually only have a short time to live. And they put all they have into restoring harmony into the body. And they know that they're giving of themselves. They're self-sacrificing. Isn't that amazing? And you contrast with that with the characteristics of the virus, right? Which are very selfish, right? And I would say the law of love is written all over our bodies. It's just an amazing thing, this unselfish behavior of our cells. Absolutely profound. But let's talk about acne, because some of you might be a little bit concerned because you don't think of acne as being a blessing. There are ways that you can deal with acne. I was doing a seminar at one point, and I mentioned what the neutrophils did, and I had a mother come up to me with her young daughter that evening, and she said, my daughter has tried everything, benzoyl peroxide. She's tried all these other acne medications, and nothing really seems to help. Is there anything that we can do? And I had just read an article about the benefits of, and this is fresh, coconut oil. So fresh, so you want a new bottle of it, not something that's been sitting on your counter for 10 years. That's rancid. You want something that's fresh, right? This is 10 times more effective in the study than benzoyl peroxide, which is your standard acne medication. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? So there are things that you can do to help your neutrophils, because they actually do need help. Believe it or not, the immune system works on a process of what we could say supply and demand, I guess. So if there's a need for a lot of neutrophils, then there's only a certain amount of these stem cells, and they can only reproduce at a given rate. So if you have an inordinate call for neutrophils, what might you be deficient in? Any of these other cells, and they all play a role in the immune system army. So when we work together and we're proactive with these threats, or with these pimples, or whatever it may be, we can help to reduce the burden on our armed forces inside. That sounds like a good thing, right? How many of you want to be good generals and help to take some of the load off of your army? It's important to do. We can overwork them, believe it or not, and overwork does cause some pretty bad side effects. But let's talk a little bit more about the neutrophil. I want you to see how capable they are. I mentioned that the neutrophil will go in and they'll eat bacteria, correct? Everyone remember that? This is how they do it. They go and they identify the bacteria, they bind to it, they bring it in, and they basically destroy it internally. It's not that they're hungry, they just know that's the way they destroy these bacteria. Now here's I think this is an electron microscope view of a bacteria, but this is a neutrophil consuming this bacteria. Do you see how it's kind of stretching around the bacteria? They're quite capable. Does anyone know what this bacteria is? In all my years of teaching this, I've only had one individual raise their hand and tell me what it was. I think they were a microbiologist. This is actually Anthrax bacteria. You've heard of anthrax before, right? Pretty deadly, right? Well, anthrax is afraid of your neutrophils because neutrophils can easily destroy anthrax. Okay, these things are capable. Our immune system is highly capable. And you think of the armed forces, and you think of the different branches of the military. You think of the special forces and the highly elite, highly trained soldiers. You have those inside. You have them, believe it or not. And we're going to learn about the neutrophil. He's more like your first responder, National Guard maybe at times. And he's important, but he's not one of the real highly trained soldiers. We're going to start advancing in complexity as we go through these immune cells. Here's the next one, basophil. And many of you do not like basophils. I already know this. You know why? How many of you like a good histamine response? Anyone? Anyone have hay fever when you've got the wheat growing or the grass growing outside? Allergy, seasonal allergies? Do you like that itchy red eyes and runny nose and sneezing? And no one here seems to be bothered by allergies. This is pretty amazing. Well, I grew up with allergies, so I knew the histamine response. I thought, oh, that's a terrible thing. It turns out that histamine is an immune compound. It's actually an important immune compound. It's produced by the basophils during an inflammatory process. It just turns out when we have allergies that it's using that chemical in the wrong way and in an inordinate amount. That's when it causes problems. But histamine is actually very important. These basophils, I would call them the transportation specialist in the immune system. Remember how I mentioned that the neutrophils will squeeze through, and other white blood cells as well, they'll squeeze through the walls of the blood vessels? You have to really, really squeeze. I can't even imagine squeezing through something like that. But they're able to do it. Not even a blood cell, red blood cell cannot even squeeze through here. So these are very small passageways. But when immune cells need to get through very quickly, histamine is called for. And what histamine does is that it actually will open up these channels so that you have more permeability and the immune cells can go just right through there. Kind of like a fireman going down his fireman pole. Get into action very quickly. And so histamine is very important for that. I grew up on antihistamines. And I tried every single one of them you can think of. The worst was Benadryl. Oh, the side effects from Benadryl, terrible. Would make me grumpy, and you've already got a teenager. Why give them Benadryl? That's going to make things a lot worse. So I was always looking for something better. But when I went through nursing school, I had a professor that started telling me, or telling the class about the process and the function of histamine. And I thought, have I been suppressing my immune system for all these years? And I went down after class and I asked my professor, would an antihistamine suppress the immune response if it needed to take place over here with blocking histamine? He thought about it for a moment. He said, yeah, of course. Have you ever been told that? It's important to know these things. So now I'm not saying you shouldn't deal with your allergies, because yes, allergies can be problematic. You need to deal with them. But histamine is important. As you can see here, it's important for our army to be able to mobilize and to go into areas that needs to take care of bacteria, viral infected cells, and so on and so forth. So you have a new appreciation for histamine now, right? What can we do? What are some of the simple things we can do for dealing with histamine? One of the most profound, and we referred to this yesterday, just drinking more water. Because, have you ever heard the secret to pollution is dilution? I don't believe in that adage, but we can apply it to this concept. If you have more volume of fluid, you have less effect of histamine. You understand? That's why we saw there's less of an allergic potential in the lungs if the lungs are properly hydrated. Okay? So that's one simple thing. And there are definitely others. I have a whole series called Supernatural Remedies. We deal with allergies and all sorts of things. And we will focus a little bit on that tomorrow too, so if you want to learn a little bit of more natural remedies. But we have to move on to the next immune cell now. And this has a lot to do with allergies, the eosinophil. Eosinophil, they have basically two functions. And they're active in either fighting parasites or in allergic type reactions. So how can we help the immune system not to produce large amounts of these if we have parasites? Are parasites something that you can control? Are they? Yes, they are. They are something you can control. And believe it or not, in very simple ways. Now, there are some parasites that are more complex, like those that invade the blood cells. This would be potentially malaria right here, but we don't have real issues with that here in the United States. What we do have more is intestinal parasites. So how do we deal with those? Well, believe it or not, active compounds found in certain seeds are highly antiparasitic. Anyone recognize that? Pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are very high in a compound known as cucurbitacin. And cucurbitacin is found in pumpkin seeds, squash seeds, gourd seeds, and there's so many good things that could be said about pumpkin seeds. I mean, just looking at the impact on male health, the beta-cytosterols that are produced and contained in the pumpkin seeds have a tremendous and profound effect on reducing the size of prostatic hypertrophy. So people with prostatitis, with having the enlarged prostate, a lot of them have been helped. And the studies would allude to this, that some pumpkin seeds a day can help keep the urologist away. Okay, and that's a good thing to know. That's one of those things that men look at with abhorrence oftentimes, if you've ever had to deal with any prostate issues. So pumpkin seeds could be a huge help. But also other seeds found in various fruit, such as the papaya. Now, this one, you may or may not like to eat papaya seeds. They're not as relishing or able to be consumed with relish as the pumpkin seeds, but they're very effective. I have a study here I want to quote that looked at both pumpkin seeds and papaya seeds. What it found was that they would paralyze and kill worms, both of them. And they would do so in a very short order. It said the time of paralysis was 1.88 minutes and 1.99 minutes. The shorter time, the 1.88 minutes being the papaya seeds, and the 1.93 minutes being the pumpkin seeds. You see that? So it could paralyze those worms within 2 minutes, within contact, 2 minutes. And then it would actually kill the worms. The papaya was a little faster in 3.45 minutes, and the pumpkin in 4.90 minutes. I think that's really amazing. And how does that help us? Well, remember, if we want to reduce, let's say we think we have worms, or we have pets, right? Or we have little children, or we go outside often and we get in the dirt. It's possible that we could pick up some parasites doing that, or we've traveled to a third world country. It's very possible that we have parasites. Maybe not enough to cause noticeable symptoms, but why not take some pumpkin seeds just to get rid of them, just in case, Something as simple as that could help to balance out that immune response so that you have more reserve for other immune cells, for other soldiers that could specialize in, let's say, fighting the coronavirus or fighting a bacterial infection, instead of unnecessarily fighting over here on this front of the parasite. Now, here's a common tactic among I guess, armies and fighting battles and that kind of thing. I haven't studied a lot of strategy, but one thing I have picked up upon is that if you want to subdue an enemy, you divide and conquer. Correct? So you have an army that now has to fight on 2 fronts or 3 fronts or 4 fronts or 4 different enemies. Then you stretch your resources, don't you? So if you can take care of the intestinal parasites with something as simple as this, then you open the potential to fight other immune cells, or to fight other infections with your remaining immune cells, correct? You see that? Everyone understand? So you have this reserve you can deal with when you're making these decisions to maybe eat some pumpkin seeds today. And pumpkin seeds, they're great. They're full of many phytonutrients, full of fiber, full of good quality protein, just very beneficial nutritiously in general. Okay, next immune cell. We're starting to move into immune cells that I start to become very excited about, and this is one of them right here, the macrophage. If anyone has ever looked under a microscope, you can spot these immune cells. And you can spot the other immune cells as well, but macrophages, there's no misunderstanding what a macrophage is. It's maybe 3, 4, 5 times bigger than a red blood cell. They're huge. They're like these tanks that are moving around in the blood. Well, actually in the blood, they're called monocytes. But they're just as big. What happens with the macrophages, they're the largest white blood cell, and what they do, they're kind of like the Marines. They take a little bit of time to deploy, but when they do, they set in and they become resident special forces wherever they are. They start out as monocytes. They travel around the bloodstream until they find or they're signaled somehow to go into an organ or a tissue group. So sometimes monocytes will go into the liver and they'll develop there into the macrophage, and they'll become a cell they're known as Kupffer cells, and they'll eat the bacteria or the fungus that might come in with your food and somehow get in over to the liver. You don't want a bacterial hepatitis, and so these cells are going to be there to help you. Another interesting thing is that these cells serve as the custodians as well. They're not only activated in times where there's an infection, but they're also active in times where there's a need to clean up. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. This immune cell is a macrophage, and it lives in the alveoli, in the very small grape-like clusters in your lungs where you have exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Very, very pivotal for our survival, these areas. So we have these immune cells that are guarding it. When they're activated, and by the way, this is called an alveolar macrophage because it lives in the alveoli. It's decided it's going to be the resident special forces soldier there in the alveoli. What it's doing right here is it's spreading out its arms, and it has more than 2. It will spread out and it will just reach out and grasp things. In this case, I believe it's grasping dust particles. These cells are also known as dust cells. So they clean the area. Now, do you have to live in a dusty environment? It is. But the EPA estimates that indoor air is 3 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. 3 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. Why is that? It's oftentimes because what I'm doing right now, I'm actually creating dust. You know, most residential dust is dead skin cells that have flaked off. In fact, I'm sorry, you're doing it too. If you look in the window when the sun is shining down, you will see all this dust, you know. Most of that is skin. So if you go over to your neighbor's house and you look and you see all this skin floating, you might be tempted to hold your breath. But don't worry. God has given us these alveolar macrophages, so if that skin does manage to get down into your alveoli, these cells will eat it, okay? But wouldn't it be better if we could get rid of that dust? That'd be good, right? We can. How can we get rid of dust? Well, by keeping the premises clean, by opening the windows and allow ventilation to go through, And I'm not recommending that during the winter time you open your windows and you freeze to death. That should be used in moderation, because good things should be done in moderation, right? So find a time of day where you can air out your house a little bit and let some fresh air come in, and let the air that's impregnated with this material, in this case, for the most part, skin, let it go outside, and nature will do the right thing with that. It'll eventually get hit by the sun. With the sun's radiation, it'll go to the ground and decompose and make some good topsoil for your garden. Now, there's another thing that happens with dust, and it's something that we need to understand. There are these little crab-like organisms that go walking around looking for your dead skin at your house. You know what they're called? Dust mites. And I wish I had a picture here, but maybe I should not show it even if I did, because it might give you nightmares. They look very sinister. Well, this is what they do. Once they find, oh, this is so-and-so's skin over here, I'm going to have a meal. They actually have a bowel movement on that skin first, because they have proteolytic or protein digesting enzymes in their feces that break down that skin and allow it to become an easily digestible meal. Now, and that's pretty bad, yes, but it gets worse. Dust mite feces is highly allergenic and inflammatory. So we need to keep the dust mites out, don't we? So how can we do that? We keep the levels of dust down, right? Here's another little factoid for you. A lot of the increased weight from a down pillow or down comforter, you'll see that as they age, they get heavier. Did you know that? They get heavier. You know what the extra weight is? Dust mite and dust mite feces. Yes. So how can you prevent that? If you like a good down pillow, feather bed, whatever, how can you prevent that? Well, experts recommend taking that and run it in the dryer at high heat. That will kill the dust mites and keep them from making a home in your bedding. And that's important to do, because that can cause inflammation. It can cause issues with overactive immune responses in the lungs. It can wear away at your reserve of these fighters, these alveolar macrophages, and imbalance your immune response. It's interesting, dealing specifically with viruses and these cells. Remember I talked a little bit about the 1918 pandemic that killed millions of people? Well, they took that virus and they inoculated mice with the virus. And they had one group of mice where they exposed them, I think it was to particulate matter, to a lot of dust. And they overwhelmed their alveolar macrophages. They had another group of mice that they allowed them to have these functioning properly. They didn't overwhelm them with dust. One group completely succumbed to the infection. You know which one it was? It was the group that was exposed to the high levels of particulate matter that did not have adequate amounts of these alveolar macrophages. Another thing that kills alveolar macrophages, cigarette smoking. So if you know, and during times of pandemic, and I think honestly, any crisis, any health crisis is a good time for you to reach out and help people that are struggling with smoking or with any of these addictions that we know are harmful for the health. This is the window of opportunity for you to make a difference and for me to make a difference. I know it's very difficult to stop smoking. I smoked in college, starting in high school and college, 4 years. And after my very first addictive cigarette, I wanted to quit. But you know what happened? I was addicted. And I spent the rest of the 4 years figuring out, how can I quit this? How can I quit? You know, there was only one thing that helped me to quit. You know what it was? You want to know?
Faith.
It was faith. That was it. When I had a conversion experience, I realized that I was fighting in my own power. I decided I wanted God to fight for me. That's the only way I had the victory. And I started doing things that were helpful, like exercising, and I started helping other people get into a good shape with their health. But all those things come under the same package of being proactive with our health. Here's an amazing concept. And we can see God's working in our bodies in this. Does anyone know what this is over here? Unless you're a pathologist, you probably don't know what this slide is. I'll explain it to you. These are muscle cells, and it looks kind of irregular. Usually muscle cells should be you should see patterns in here and a lot of lines going across. Well, this is all broken up because this is dead muscle. And this is very important muscle because it's cardiac muscle. This is, I believe, 4 days post-heart attack. And what happens is, if you have a severe enough heart attack, you'll have an area of the heart that actually dies because it's starved of oxygen. And if it were not for the macrophages, see all these little blue dots? Those are macrophages. They're in here cleaning up your heart. If it were not for the function of the macrophages, you would have a bacterial infection, myocarditis, and die from that infection. If it were not for these little immune cells, well, they're big immune cells, going in here and cleaning this heart muscle, the dead heart muscle, out. We call that necrotic tissue, and that tends to harbor bacterial infections. So it's interesting when you look at the book of Psalms 51:10 says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Ultimately, we are not, maybe I shouldn't say we're the commander-in-chief of our immune system. I would say God is the commander-in-chief, because he's the one that actually directs these immune cells to go in there and to clean this out. It's really amazing to see this. And these immune cells, they're going to give their lives so that the body can live as well. As I said before with the other immune cells, very unselfish. They say, you know what? Greater love hath no immune cell than this, than I lay down my life for the body. It's an amazing thing. Okay, next we're going to go into what we call lymphocytes. And lymphocytes tend to dwell a lot in the lymph nodes. We call it the other circulatory system of the body. And we're going to talk first about the T cells. T cells are really important, and there are a number of different types. One is the killer T cell. He's kind of like your infantryman. Another is a helper T cell. They're kind of like the helpers, the facilitators of the immune system targeting the enemy. So they're very important. And then you also have some called regulatory T cell, which are immune cells that declare victory. They say we don't need to fight anymore. Is that an important part of the immune system? Is it important that once you recognize your soldiers have won a victory, they've won the war, is it important to bring them home and let them live normal lives? Yes, you don't want them always battling something that's not even there, right? And that's the same thing with the immune system. It's interesting, just as a little aside, some people tend to be always sick. Have you noticed that? They're always sick. Well, it turns out that if our immune system is hyperactive, it's always active, fighting something, or maybe because of an autoimmune condition, we have much greater propensity to have the mental powers affected. One study found that prolonged activation of interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and another compound associated with the immune response called tumor necrosis factor appears to result in a maladaptive sickness response and the manifestation of depression, depressive symptoms. So if our bodies are always on the attack, what's going to happen? We're going to become depressed. So it's important for us to have properly functioning regulatory T cells, isn't it? It's important for that victory to be won. So there are really important reasons for all of these immune cells that we have, and we need to support them in their work. Now, let's talk a little bit about comorbidities. We discussed this yesterday, and we found individuals with hypertension, obesity, and in particular, these two. 1 out of every 2 COVID hospitalization was with hypertension and obesity as a comorbidity. Okay? So do you think these could deplete the immune response, potentially? Hypertension? Or potentially obesity? Did a little bit of research on that and found something very startling. It turns out that the immune system with obesity is hyperactive. We have increased something called resistin in the body, which is pro-inflammatory. It stimulates an immune response. It increases levels of what? Interleukin 1. I just read this, didn't I? Interleukin 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. What does this cause? Depression. You see that? Causes depression. It's no wonder that we have chronic levels of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and chronic levels of depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric disorders. They really they mesh in a lot of ways. They mesh. And so what can we do? Well, studies have found that if an individual is struggling with obesity, let's say they're struggling with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, studies have found that if they just lose 10 pounds, using regular, moderate physical exercise, and they continue on that path, their diabetic process is in reversal. It's being reversed. So it's not like, well, one day when I lose 100 pounds, I'll be healthy again. You know that? It doesn't work like that. It really is, today I'm going to make a decision to do the right thing, and I'm going to be healthy. Just like that. It's so fast. The body responds very quickly. Now, true, you may have to work at it for a year to get down to the ideal weight that you want to be, but making those proper decisions, we're blessed immediately. Our immune system is helped almost immediately. So it's very important for us not to become depressed or discouraged if we realize we're fighting against maybe one of these comorbidities, and we think, well, how can I deal with this? I'm going to give up. No, don't give up. You can do it. You can do it. And it just one step at a time. I consider health, if I had to just paint the picture, the paradigm of health with an illustration, I would say it's kind of like this. Sickness is a path that we get down, we start walking down, and we have various manifestations of that sickness. Let's say for hypertension and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, there's a common set of physiologic parameters we call metabolic syndrome. And that could be your blood pressure starts to go up, your sugar starts to go up a little bit, but you're not yet at full-blown diabetes or heart disease, right? But you're along that journey. But the beautiful thing about the paradigm of health is when you turn around, you may have to walk back a little bit, but you're walking in the path of health. Some people say, well, I can't get healthy. Yes, you can. Just turn around. Just turn around. You'll be walking. Honestly, we're all walking on the path of health, all of us, because none of us has a perfected, immortalized body, right? We're always striving to become more and more healthy and to retain that health and that ability that we have. But it doesn't matter where you are on the paradigm of health. If you just turn in the right direction, you're going in the right way. And you're going to be blessed. So don't become depressed. Don't become discouraged. It's actually rather easy to start going on the right way. Now, the perseverance, that might become a little bit difficult, but you can do it by taking one step at a time. One step at a time. It's all it takes. Okay? All right, so T cell. What can we do to help T cells? Well, I don't have it in this presentation, but has anyone ever heard of Echinacea? Echinacea, purple coneflower. Okay, it turns out Echinacea root has been found to have a number of effects on the immune system. Echinacea, I need to give this disclaimer, it's not for everyone. If you have an autoimmune condition, it should not be taken. And this is the reason why. Because it has a dramatic effect upon the T cells, the function of the T cells. What it will do is it will decrease the amount of regulatory T cells. So the immune system becomes more active. Do you understand why? There are less regulatory T cells saying, hey, we don't need to fight anything. There's no battle, right? You don't have as many of those when taking Echinacea, so you have a heightened immune response. What also happens is Echinacea stimulates helper T cells to go around and to find potential threats. So the immune boosting properties of Echinacea, according to the studies, 1, help to heighten the immune response, but 2, help to find the actual intruder. So knowing those things and realizing that you don't have an autoimmune condition or a contraindication to doing this, when would you want to take Echinacea? At the beginning or an end of an infection? The very beginning. Very beginning. In fact, if your family member's sick, hey, it's time to take a dose of Echinacea. Because I want to be ready. I want my soldiers to be on red alert right now. Do you see how you can be a wise general of your immune system, of your army within? You can help it in very simple ways. Okay, let's go on here to, oh, you know what? I did have a picture of Echinacea. I knew it was there somewhere. There it is. Okay, let's go on to the B cells. And B cells, you've probably heard a lot about the B cells in this pandemic because they have the ability to produce antibodies. And antibodies are helpful for long-term immunity. B cell is kind of like an army intelligence officer. They will store intelligence in the form of antibodies for decades. So that when a threat comes around again, the B cell replicates itself and it starts to produce antibodies, could potentially produce thousands of these in a few seconds. And these antibodies can lock on to targets and either cause the virus or the bacteria to not be able to infect cells anymore, or at least target them for a destruction by the immune response. Anyone ever gone into a forest where they're about to do some timber work? And what will they do? They'll mark trees that they either want cut down or kept in place. Everyone see that? Seen like little bands, plastic bands around the trees or spray paint marks. Well, antibody works in a similar fashion in that targeting of threats. The immune system is kind of like the lumberjack that comes in and says, hey, you're targeted for destruction. I'll destroy you. You don't need to be in the body. So antibodies are very important and very helpful. But what happens if you come upon a threat that your body has never seen before? Are antibodies going to help you? Not if the body has never seen it before. Now, there is a phenomenon called cross-reactivity, where if you got some type of childhood coronavirus, by the way, coronavirus is one of the common colds, so a lot of us have been exposed to a type of a coronavirus before. So we have antibodies to those. And what they found was that if you're infected with COVID or one of the SARS or the MERS, those are all coronaviruses, infected with one of these, you have some degree of protection because you were infected already and you have antibodies that can potentially identify segments of that coronavirus. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. Now, that whole concept of natural immunity, unfortunately in today's day and age, has been somewhat obscured, but God has given you immunity and immune power to use to fight disease. It's an amazing, amazing concept. But what happens, as I said before, if you don't have any antibodies and you have a new threat that's potentially lethal? That's where the natural killer cell comes in. And natural killer cells are the highest echelon of the special forces in your immune system army. I would say they're 2-star generals and Navy SEALs all in one. Sounds pretty impressive, right? They're very capable, and they have authority to do a lot of things that other immune cells don't have the authority to do. I'm going to explain how this works. They're known as the innate immune special forces. Innate immunity means it's always there. You always have it. Whereas acquired immunity is you acquire after a previous infection. So now you're immune to it because you can fight it because you fought it before. But the innate immune response is what's necessary for new viral threats or even for cancer, because cancer is new when it starts. And these cells have the capability of destroying cancer before it really takes a foothold and builds a huge tumor in the body. In fact, natural killer cells collectively are known as the tumor neighborhood watch or tumor surveillance system. And it turns out that when we have suppressed levels of natural killer cells, we have much greater risk of cancer development. Also, we have much greater potential for viral infection. I'll give you an example of this. Anyone know what this virus is? You probably saw it on the news about 7 years ago. It's the Zaire Ebola virus. Yeah. Pretty dangerous, right? I think 40% mortality, something like that. 40% of people who got the virus died. It's a very deadly virus. But as I said before, God has given your body the ability to fight these threats. And I would say to not even blink an eye. It's so easy for your immune system, when properly functioning, to destroy these threats. It's actually amazing. This study was back in 2004. It was looking, I believe, at the Zaire strain of Ebola virus. And what it found was that mice that had activated and properly functioning natural killer cells were able to defeat what would normally be a fatal Ebola virus infection. Just right here with the natural killer cell activation. And so the researchers wrote this in summary: therapeutic agents that bolster the innate immune response, including activation of natural killer cells, should be the target of future studies. Do you see why they're recommending this? Because think about this. Was there a cure for Zaire Ebola virus back then when it was raging in sub-Saharan Africa? Not really. They were just they were using containment measures mostly. And it would just go through like a forest fire and just, it would cause a lot of loss of life, unfortunately. But the researchers, even prior to that time, were sounding an alarm. Hey, let's bolster the natural killer cells because they can take care of Ebola. They can take care of Ebola. What do you think about COVID-19? Do you think natural killer cells could take care of COVID-19? Do you think it's a potential? Well, let's see what the research says. In the original SARS-1, researchers found the number of natural killer cells changed in patients with SARS and correlated with disease severity. So the more severe infection, the less natural killer cells you had that were actively functioning. Now that's a correlation, right? But let's see if we can delve a little further into this. It also found the number of natural killer cells and expression of a certain marker on the surface of natural killer cells changed in patients with SARS and correlated with disease severity. And new studies looking at coronavirus or COVID-19 have actually found a direct link between the function and action of the natural killer cells and disease severity and mortality in COVID-19. So what does that mean? Are natural killer cells important for us today? We don't have Ebola, but we do have COVID. Well, hopefully no one here has it or has gotten over it, but we have the threat of COVID. We have the threat of COVID. So this is so important. And believe it or not, I would say that the natural killer cells, if we don't have properly functioning natural killer cells, we're in severe danger of mortality or death from COVID-19. And this is the reason why. Because it turns out that the coronavirus is a stealth virus. It operates in stealth. A lot of times, viruses will infect a cell, and then they will bud and you go elsewhere. At that point, they can be detected, and they can be neutralized by antibodies. The coronavirus, what it can do is actually come up beside another cell. So one infected cell comes up beside another cell, and it fuses together. And you have these huge conglomerations of cells where everything is being secretly done inside, and the immune system is not being alerted as to what's going on. So no one knows. And if this keeps happening, all of a sudden, you have a surprise attack that's being waged because of all the virus particles that have been produced, and suddenly they're released upon the body. This is kind of dangerous. Now, we do have a safeguard. We have two safeguards against this kind of thing happening. One is the fact that any protein that's being produced in the cell, there's a snippet of that protein that's taken and it's put on the surface of the cell. And immune cells will come and they'll say, oh, you've made such and such in the cell. That's good. Keep up the good work. Or they might say, oh, you're producing a virus? We got to get rid of you. And they will destroy that cell. What happens with coronavirus is startling, because not only is coronavirus reproducing itself potentially in this way, but also suppressing the expression of those proteins on the surface of the cell. This article right here, it's called MHC class 1. There's a protein that's produced by COVID-19, or CoV-2, expression of ORF8, which is a protein directly binds to this protein that's produced on the cell that tells the immune system what's going on inside, downregulates their surface expression. This is stealthy. It's operating in stealth. And to make matters worse, remember the killer T cells? Normally they would take care of viral infected cells, but they can't do it because they don't have the authority to attack a human cell without seeing that they're producing something bad inside, without seeing. So kind of consider this. If you were driving down the road and you were speeding, and you get pulled over by a police officer, and that police officer only has jurisdiction to write you a ticket if you will show him your license. Now, please don't go and do this. I'm just painting a picture, hypothetical. And so you think, oh, I know that. I'm going to roll up my window and I'm not going to talk to him. Well, what happens? A police officer can't do anything to you, right? Because he doesn't have the authority unless he sees your driver's license. Consider that kind of like the protein that's being displayed on the outer part of the cell that's infected with the virus. If the virus says, I'm not going to show you that, then the T cell can't do anything. But that's when natural killer cells come in. Because natural killer cells, remember, they're the 2-star general and the Navy SEAL all together. They can go on their own authority and they can attack this conglomeration of cells just because they're being deceptive. They realize, oh, you're a human cell. You're supposed to be displaying this protein, the MHC protein, on your surface, but you're not doing it. Therefore, we can destroy you. We can destroy you. Do you see why it's so important for us to have adequately functioning natural killer cells in the face of the coronavirus pandemic? It's absolutely essential. It's essential. If we do not have properly functioning natural killer cells, we will probably die from coronavirus. It's that serious. It's that serious. So what can we do then to bolster our immune response using the natural killer cells? Isn't that a good question to ask? Okay, well, there are a number of things that we can do. One of them is by just getting a good night's sleep. Believe it or not, simple things. It turns out that the compound that's produced when we get a good night's sleep, starting with an early bedtime, called melatonin, and by the way, your body will make it much better than getting it in a capsule form. And there are actually some problems that arise taking it in capsule form. Just go to bed on time. Don't worry about getting it as a supplement. That's the best way to have it. What they found was that natural killer cell activity is greatly increased, and the numbers of natural killer cells are greatly increased by the adequate production of melatonin during nighttime sleep. So what does that tell you? Get to bed on time, right? And there's an old adage that says that the early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And that is so true in terms of your natural killer cells as well. So that's one simple thing that can be done. Another thing is exercise. Exercise is good for the immune system in general, and you don't have to just jump rope. Just going for a walk is something very simple. Breathing fresh air is something very simple in terms of bolstering and modulating the immune response, because it will equalize in its proper form when we're making healthy decisions. That's a very important principle about the immune system and a healthy lifestyle. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind. If you're exercising outside, you get even more benefit. They have some studies in Japan that looked at some phenomenon they call forest bathing, which is kind of a silly name. Basically, it's a field trip to the woods. They would take these individuals that live in the city, they would drive them to a forest in Japan and say, go spend a few hours walking around in the pine trees and just relaxing, being out in nature. Well, they wanted to see in the specific group of individuals what would happen to their immune responses after exposure to the air in this pine forest. What they found was quite astounding. Do you know the essential oils? The essential oil of orange, of oregano, some of these more familiar ones, right? There's essential oil of pine, and in fact, there's essential oil in every fragrant tree. You go outside and smell the pine, you're smelling the essential oil. There are components in there called pinene. These pinene are highly active in terms of modulating and improving immune response. Here's what they found. These findings indicate that the one-day trip to a forest park increased natural killer cell activity, number of natural killer cells, and levels of intracellular anti-cancer proteins like interferon, which is something that really, it helps your body fight viruses and fight cancer. And the effect lasted at least for 7 days following the trip. 7 days. So just a few hours being out in the pine forest gives you almost 7 days of protection. Isn't that amazing? And it's so simple. Well, some of you might ask, well, maybe I'm not around pine trees, or how can I get that benefit in other ways? Well, the researchers asked that question as well. And I still think there's no comparison to just being out in nature, getting the sunshine and fresh air and walking. That's a huge blessing. But if you can't do that, here's another way you can bring it home. And maybe you want to increase the positive benefit of the pine. Well, here's another way you can do that. These group of researchers said, okay, let's gather a group of men. We'll give them a few hotel rooms in an urban environment, and we'll have them come spend the night here, then go to work for 3 days. But what we'll do is we'll run a vaporizer that has pine oil being diffused in it. And you can walk in and you can detect that there are these pine essential oils, because you smell it, right? They might have used some really complex machinery to detect the pinenes in the air, but if you can smell pine, you've detected pinenes in the air, okay? So next time you go out to the forest, you could say, I detect pinenes in the air. You sound very intelligent. So it's there if you can smell it, okay? So these men would go to sleep and they would smell this pine oil for how many nights? 3 nights. They checked their blood for immune cell activity, and I think they went for a whole month in checking this. What they found was truly, truly amazing. I'll read the take home here. It said, this exposure to these pinene substances significantly, how much? Significantly increased natural killer cell activity and the percentages of natural killer cells. And the effects lasted up to 30 days. 30 days. That's amazing. That's amazing. You know, I'm just a lowly public health educator, but if I had the ear of an individual who was responsible for initiatives on the broad scale of public health, not only would I encourage them, as the researchers from last night encouraged to put hydration testing by COVID testing and make sure people are getting enough water, I would also have a vaporizer with pine essential oil running at that testing station, okay? And I would encourage people to take that home, because this could literally save millions of people's lives. And it's so simple, so simple. Now, a few friends and I went outside just earlier today, and we grabbed some pine needles and we walked around and smelled, got a little bit of intense pine treatment. You can do that as well. I used to teach this on the post-secondary level, health and wellness, and everyone in the institution knew when Ron was talking about pine that day, because all the students would be going out, running outside and grabbing pine needles and breaking them and walking around the campus smelling them. Because, yeah, it's so profound, but it's so simple. Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. And it's potentially life-saving. Absolutely amazing. Remember the interferon we just heard about, that the pine also increases? Here's another research study that showed production of functional interferon after infection with the original SARS is purported to be, quote, essential for the control of potentially lethal coronavirus infections. Here's another way that the pine could help. Okay? So very, very simple treatments or remedies, preventative remedies. Okay, here's another one. This is a little bit more hard to handle, I must admit. How many of you like a good cold shower? Okay, well, here's how researchers, I'm not saying you have to do this, here's how researchers have boosted natural killer cell levels in a different way. They found that if you are adequately warmed first, so you get warm, maybe you take a hot shower first, and then you're exposed to cold. So in this case, it could be the cold shower. It has a tremendous effect on natural killer cell levels and activity. Now keep this in mind. If you've never done this before, you don't want to go all the way hot and all the way cold. You know why? That's too much of a shock. You can actually faint. There have been people that have fainted with this treatment. So just keep that in mind. Be careful, because it can get, and some people, if like healthy young men, they love to just put it as hot as they can get it, as cold as they can get. You may not need that, honestly. And to be totally honest with you, you may not even need it at all, because you live in Minnesota and it gets cold during the winter, okay? So a lot of times we think, oh, you know, summer is my time to exercise, and when it's cold, I'm just going to stay inside, right? Studies have found that when we actually exercise outside, so we're getting warm, you know, we're warming up the body through exercise, and then we have that exposure to the cold air, that in and of itself increases natural killer cell levels and activity. That's amazing, isn't it? So how many of you want to go outside and shovel some more snow this winter? It could be helpful. It could save your life. But just keep in mind, as they say, more heart attacks happen with the first snowfall because people who have not exercised the whole year go out and shovel their whole driveway. So use moderation with exercise too. It's very important to build up to a level of activity you can handle. But hey, exposure to cold is not such a bad thing after all. Now, that comes with one little important note. Coronavirus, and especially the Delta variant, likes cold. It likes cold. Studies have looked at temperature variations that occur in the sinuses as compared with the lungs. Which one is going to be cooler? Which do you think? The nose, right? This is air-cooled. This is, you know, you've got an air-cooled engine on your lawnmower. These are air-cooled tissues right here. You're constantly cooling these by breathing air through them. Heat is lost. So you have a temperature difference of maybe, I don't know, maybe it's 85 degrees there. Depends on how cold it is outside. But it turns out that coronavirus likes to grow there. And especially when compared with the temperature of the lungs, you have much greater replication in the cooler areas. So the Delta variant takes that a step forward, and you have anywhere from 300 to 1,000 times the viral load in your sinuses and your nose with the Delta variant. Okay? Now, you might say, well, I don't want to go out in the cold then. Well, if you're going out in the cold and you're having a proper function of your innate immune response, you don't have much to worry about. It's when we're not having that. In fact, that same research that looked at the temperature variations and the COVID replication found that oftentimes in the sinuses, you have less innate immune signaling going on there. So that makes it, this is why this is a real pandemic that we're in, because this virus can replicate in the nose. You can sneeze and you can pass it on to someone else. But if we take proper precautions with our personal health, we can fight it before it gets a huge foothold, before we have a huge viral load. And it's things potentially like pine. It's things potentially like taking a nice hot shower. Some people will do something called vapor inhalation, you know, where they lean over and they smell maybe some, and don't burn yourself, of course, but they smell some of the warm vapor coming up from a tub of water. Or you have to be careful with doing this. It's called hydrotherapy. But it's called steam vapor inhalation therapy. And you're actually increasing the temperature of the upper airways. And that's also helpful in regular human influenza as well, because human influenza likes to grow there as well in the sinuses. And they like to replicate in lower temperatures. So that's something that could be potentially done. Now, if you have a gas stove and you put the pot of water on your gas stove and you're leaning over it, what else are you going to be inhaling? Gas. So be careful with that. You have to think things through if you're going to do something like this. But there definitely are ways to do that. Just going in the hot shower, you know, breathing in the steam, taking a shower a day could keep COVID away, believe it or not. And finish with the cold, carefully, in a cautious way. Some people ask, well, how long do I have to run the cold? to trigger the natural killer cell activity? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some people say a couple seconds, but realistically, it's probably going to be maybe, well, I'll go easy on you, okay? Some people say a minute, and I don't know about that. The key is to have a reddening response. You don't want to have a burn, but what happens is when you have warm, you get all red, right? The skin gets kind of red. When you have cold exposure to that warm area, you can have some reddening of the skin, right? Your children go outside, their cheeks get all flushed. Have you seen that phenomenon when they go outside in the wintertime? That's a good response right there. That's showing that there's a reaction going on to that cold, and that's what you want to see. So it could take 5 seconds, it could take 10 seconds. I like to do it for 30 seconds, but I've been doing it for a while. And I'll tell you what, my wife always knows when I'm doing this treatment, because you'll do the cold water dance. Because you got to do something to kind of bear with it. But as I said before, be careful, because if you've never done this before, you could faint. I've known people to actually do that. So be cautious with it. Maybe you want to do it sitting down. Maybe you just want to have your wife come and dump a cup of cold water on you after the shower while you're sitting down. She might take joy in doing that. I don't know. But either way, it's that hot and cold that's going to actually bring benefit. And we'll talk a little bit more about hydrotherapy and some additional treatments tomorrow. Okay. Let's go on here. We talked about some things you could do to bolster natural killer cells, and there are others as well. But let's talk now about some things that you could do to decrease the numbers of natural killer cells. This right here is probably one of the worst offenders for killing or suppressing the natural killer cells. It's known as Benzopyrene. It's a compound that really will wipe out your natural killer cells. Does anyone know where it comes from? Anyone? Well, I will tell you, one of the common sources is cigarette smoke. And in fact, even smokeless tobacco has high levels of benzopyrene. So it's not enough that the cigarette smoke has carcinogens in it, but it also has benzopyrene that turns off the tumor surveillance system. And that might be even more dangerous, because we're constantly bombarded with carcinogens. Carcinogens are all around us. But if our natural killer cells are working properly, we can fight against the development of that tumor. Smokeless tobacco, they were wondering, well, how does that cause head and neck cancer to appear? It turns out the benzopyrene diffuses into the tissues of the head and neck and shuts down natural killer cell activity in this area. So what happens? Tumors can start to develop. Everyone see that? So now I'm going to show you something that can be very disheartening, but I want you to take good courage, because there are workarounds, okay? There are workarounds. This is not the number one source of benzopyrene for the average American. You know what it is? Not even alcohol. Charbroiled meats. Charbroiled. In fact, one charbroiled steak will have more benzopyrene than several cartons of cigarettes. So imagine how much that's going to suppress the natural killer cell response. Why have you not heard about this on the news? Could it be that Burger King was running an ad on that newscast as well? I don't know. Go figure. But it's something to consider. Now, what can we do? Let's talk about, okay, we're over here. Let's say we realize, hey, this is going to cause me potentially to maybe get cancer, or maybe have a more severe coronavirus infection. What can I do? Let's turn around and take one step at a time. One step could be, let's not charbroil it anymore. Let's boil it, right? Because you're going to have much less benzopyrene being produced for boiling or baking, okay? So that's a step that we can take. But ultimately, even grilled chicken has high levels of benzopyrene. So what can we do? Well, if we want to move away from benzopyrene because we want our natural killer cells to function properly, we have to start moving away, especially from the charred meats, even charred foods. You know, roasted coffee beans have benzopyrene because their outer surface is seared, it's burned. If you burn your toast, have it medium instead of well done. You know, that's a step in the right direction. So burned food is not a good thing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. There are lists of foods containing high levels of benzopyrene that you can download, but what I've already given you is enough for most people, okay? It's enough to know this and to just start going forward with that. And I hate to say it because I know barbecuing is one of those great American pastimes. Wouldn't you agree? But I think it's time. I'll tell you what, if we don't do something, there's going to be no American pastime in general because of the way things are going. I guess I could say I'm very shocked to see our liberties and the coercive methods that are being used to try to bolster what appears to be health or a positive intervention that's causing economic disruption, and that's causing societal anger, and that's causing stripping of freedoms away. We're in trouble, brothers and sisters. We're in trouble. But you know what? The real solutions are actually very simple. And those solutions can be grassroots solutions. You know that? Drinking water, going out for a walk outside, maybe taking a cold shower. These are simple things. They're simple. And they're things that all of us can do. And I think that if we each take up in our sphere of responsibility, if we're doing the right thing, we're going to benefit the whole in a big way. We share this information. By the way, it's wellness worth sharing. And I think it's even more worth sharing at this point in Earth's history than any other time. Wouldn't you agree? It's time. It's time to share. Okay. Last thing that I want to focus on that can decrease, actually the second to last thing, that can decrease natural killer cell activity. This was from the journal Alcohol, which studies alcoholic beverages, published in 2002. It found these results indicate that ethanol suppresses activation of natural killer cells primarily by suppressing the natural killer cell response. So you've heard that wine is good for your heart, right? You've heard that? Well, it depends on who you ask. The researchers that published the very first clinical research study that saw a correlation between platelet stickiness and the use of ethanol, you know what they had to say? They said these results in no way justify the use of wine or alcohol for prevention purposes. Why? Because ethanol is a toxin, and we see its toxic effects on the natural killer cells. But you know who ran with that story? And who started making ads based on that? The alcohol industry. Why? Because, hey, it's been selling a lot of products since then. But the original researchers said, no, it still doesn't justify its usage because you know why? You can still get that same benefit from the decreased platelet stickiness just from the grape. And the interesting thing about the grape is it has high amounts of resveratrol. And that resveratrol has been found not only to inhibit platelet aggregation or platelet stickiness, it's good for the heart, but also increases the susceptibility of tumor cells to natural killer cells, so probably produces interferon somehow there, but also increases the cytotoxic activity of natural killer cells. It arms them more effectively. So now you have a Navy SEAL, instead of with an ineffective weapon, with something that's very effective. Increased effectiveness of those natural killer cells just by going to the grape. Whereas if you go to the wine, it's going to impair the natural killer cells. So it's my belief that as much as possible, we should try to get back to the way God made it. And that's in general for food. There's this phenomenon that's called refinement of food in the modern era. And you think of refinement as being a good thing, right? Someone said that you're refined in manners, you know. Oh, thank you, I appreciate that. That seems like a compliment. But refined foods is not a compliment. Why? Because it's been stripped of a lot of nutrition, stripped of mostly of fiber, a lot of vitamins. And you know what food company manufacturers will do with those vitamins and that fiber? They will repackage it as a supplement and say, here, you've got to buy this for good health now. But we can just get it from the original source. In many, many cases, the original source, it has all that we need. So, I want to leave you with one last thing, and this is my most important point of the whole presentation. Okay, so if anyone is asleep, nudge them right now, because now is the time to pay attention. Understand this. The health benefits of a merry heart. I don't know why, but researchers in Japan really like to study natural killer cells. They really like to study these things dealing with innate immunity. And I think we could learn a lot from them. They decided they were going to go to a nursing home, and they were going to give the residents of the nursing home, or first they were going to do some blood work, and then they brought in some musical instruments. And they said, we want you to choose a musical instrument and to play a song that you really enjoy, and to enjoy yourself for 2 hours. Or maybe it was an hour of recreational music making. What they found was in this group of elderly individuals, when they started to de-stress, here's part of it, and make a joyful noise, okay, and take their minds off their troubles. And I'll tell you, if you're in the nursing home, you tend to be a little more depressed than the average individual. You know, if you've ever been to a nursing home, ever worked in a nursing home, you see that. Well, these people had their spirits lifted for 1 hour. You know what they found? In the older group, we found significant increases in the number of lymphocytes, T cells, helper T cells, memory T cells, production of interferon, remember that one? And even interleukin that allowed the cells to communicate more effectively. That's amazing. And all it took was 1 hour. How many of you ever visited a nursing home before? And I know a lot of churches will go and do, sing for the nursing home residents. And you may think, well, they don't even remember that, maybe she had Alzheimer's and she doesn't even know who I am. But I'll tell you what, it made a profound impact on that person or that group. Profound. And this testifies to it. Just 1 hour. 1 hour could save a life later on. Okay? 1 hour. It's amazing, the potential. But this doesn't just apply to the nursing home, because there are people all over the world, and especially in the United States of America, that are struggling with depression and anxiety or other depressive symptoms. We already learned that 1 in 4 Americans will struggle with some type of mental disorder. A lot of that is depression or depression related. Well, how does depression in general affect natural killer cells and our ability to fight viruses and cancer? Researchers found that there is blunted natural killer cell activity in severely depressed patients. What does that mean? When you're depressed, your natural killer cells are depressed too. And what they found was the higher the degree of depression, the less and less natural killer cells were functioning. That's dangerous, isn't it? And what are all the lockdowns doing? What is keeping you from going to church doing? And I hate to say this, while the liquor stores and the bars are still open, which are suppressing natural killer cell levels. It just doesn't make sense. I wonder where the policymakers are getting their scientific information from, because I don't have a PhD and I could easily find it on their government databases. This is easily searchable for all people if you know medical terminology. So we're just like our healthcare system, unfortunately, is backwards. Our health information is backwards right now. And our societal, the way we're trying to structure things and coerce things, it's backwards. and fighting against people, I hate to say this, that don't want to take a vaccine. Who would have thought? Are those people going to become anxious? Someone's going to be anxious. Someone's going to be depressed. And I've seen it split apart churches. I've seen it split apart families. This is terrible. And what is it doing? It's suppressing natural killer cell levels, the very thing that we need to fight the virus. Our focus is off. And I'm not against it. If you want to take the vaccine and you've studied it, it's your freedom of choice to do it. But when there's coercion and force and anger and bitterness involved, it hurts everyone. It hurts everyone. But God has a better way. God has a better way. You know what it is? The merry heart. Because a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. Where does the immune system come from? It comes from the bone marrow, which is in the bones. Do you see that? Does everyone see this? Let me go back here real quick. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. That is amazing. Okay, we don't have modern research during the time of Solomon, but he was a very wise man, wasn't he? This is divine insight right here, and it's applicable to all of our lives. This is the number one remedy against COVID right here. This is the number one, a merry heart. And stay away from that broken spirit. It's true, we can have a broken and contrite heart when we come to God, and then we're coming in repentance. Maybe we've done something wrong, but we don't have to let that linger, because he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness and give us that merry heart that comes from his abiding presence. This is what he wants for us. And I'll tell you, I'm going to go even more in depth into this because it's so amazing. Researchers have found there's a compound that's produced during the love response, the loving emotion, the loving thoughts, the hugs, the smiles, the joyous words that are shared between people that care about each other. All these things produce a compound in the brain known as oxytocin. Say it with me, oxytocin. Now, I had a preacher stand up. Some of you might even know him. I had a preacher stand up after one of these events and said, "Everyone go get your OxyContin." I said, no. It's oxytocin. Oxytocin. It's not a narcotic. Oxytocin is a compound that's produced in the brain after what response, what emotion? Love, right? Love. And I'm talking about pure love. Pure love. It can be paternal. It can be fraternal. It can be maternal. Romantic. All of these trigger the production of oxytocin to some extent, along with other chemicals potentially as well. However, what oxytocin does against COVID is absolutely amazing. Absolutely. This is a COVID study right here, by the way. I'm going to read this. And I'm not going to explain it until I finish, okay? Because there's some medical jargon in here. I just want to get through it quickly. But I want you to look at this diagram. OXT is oxytocin up here, okay? And down here is everything else dealing with COVID. Everything else. All right? Now, with that in mind, and looking at this diagram, let me explain what it means. And don't worry, you don't have to know any of this. You don't have to repeat any of this, because the take-home message is love one another, okay? But let me give you more reason to do that. It says oxytocin carries special functions in immunologic defense, homeostasis, and surveillance. It suppresses neutrophil infiltration and inflammatory cytokine release. Ever heard of cytokine storm? The reason many people die from COVID? Oxytocin suppresses that. Okay, activates T lymphocytes, antagonizes negative effects of angiotensin II and other key pathological events of COVID-19. Additionally, oxytocin can promote interferon expression. Remember that one? We need interferon to fight COVID. It promotes interferon expression. I'm going to skip some of this. Increases superoxide dismutase expression, which is the body's #1 most effective antioxidant. You produce your own antioxidants when you love. Okay, and other times as well, but when you love, you produce your own antioxidants. How many of you think antioxidants are good for the health? Yeah, we've heard that. But love triggers you to produce them yourself. It's amazing. Okay, reading on here. Through these mechanisms, oxytocin can block viral invasion, suppress cytokine storm, reverse lymphocytopenia. Remember the decrease in immune cells? Oxytocin can reverse it. Okay? And let me read back here. Prevent progression to acute respiratory distress syndrome and multiple organ failures. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Importantly, besides prevention of metabolic disorders associated with atherosclerosis and diabetes, oxytocin can protect the heart and vasculature through suppressing hypertension and brain-heart syndrome and promoting regeneration of injured cardiomyocytes. And this is a whole different, I could talk all day about just the fact that love rebuilds the heart. It triggers cells to go in, other stem cells to go in and become cardiac muscle cells. You can rebuild the heart with oxytocin. It's amazing. In fact, you can rebuild any tissue in the body with oxytocin. You know that? Because you have stem cells that are known as MSC, mesenchymal stem cells, MCS, I guess, mesenchymal stem cells, that they have found when they can steer these over to the pancreas, they will start functioning as pancreatic beta cells in type 1 diabetics, thus reversing the need for insulin. So these cells, when they go where they need to go, they can do anything. You want to know how to get them where they need to go? Okay. All you've got to do is have some hurt somewhere in the body. Now, I'm not telling you to go and hurt yourself. It's just going to happen, right? Got some inflammatory compounds because you stubbed your toe, right? You need some tissue regeneration there. The inflammatory compounds call mesenchymal stem cells into circulation. And it's, remember Toucan Sam? Remember him? Once he got the whiff of the Fruit Loops, he made a beeline over there, right? That's what the mesenchymal stem cells do. They recognize, oh, there's hurt, let's go. And they go right next to the cell that's hurt, and they look upon that cell with pity and empathy, but they do nothing unless a receptor is triggered on their surface. You know what that receptor is triggered by? Oxytocin. Love. Love comes and hits them on the shoulder and says, go ahead. And they say, I'm going to devote my life to doing what you were doing. You can't do it anymore, unfortunately, but I'm going to step in and I'm going to build up the ranks. Isn't that amazing? It's the law of love. And the way I see it, God has given us the same job. We're to go out in the world and find people that are hurting, right? But unless we have love, we can't actually help them. And in fact, back on a physiologic level, you know what happens when that stem cell just sits there and it says, okay, I don't have the oxytocin. You know what it becomes? A fat cell. Their default without oxytocin is to become an adipocyte or a fat cell. Now, how many Americans need more fat cells? So what do we need? More love. We need more love so that those cells don't just by default become fat cells. They actually regenerate the body. Okay? They regenerate the body. And in the same way, if we just stand around and maybe criticize or inspect or when people are hurting, we're not going to do any good. But when we have love, we can change the world around us. And this is my bottom line message. Without love, any intervention will fail in restoring man to wholeness. Okay? We're told that in all of Christ's healing, there was love. You know, when he looked at Everyone remember the story of the rich young ruler? What did it say about Christ? He looked at him and he loved him. Okay? Christ is looking at us right now and he's loving us. And some people will say, well, I don't have any love in my life. I don't have any love. I don't have a spouse. Or my spouse, I'm not going to get any oxytocin from them, maybe some adrenaline, getting angry all the time. But you know what? Even if you do get love from your spouse, don't be dependent upon them for oxytocin. It's good that you get it. It's good that you get it from other people. But there's one source of oxytocin that will never, ever, ever let you down. Okay? You know who it is? It's God. Because God is love. God is love. You know what the ultimate solution for this coronavirus pandemic is? It's to know Jesus Christ, to know his love, to embrace that love and let it transform us. That's the ultimate remedy. And remember, a merry heart doeth good, like a medicine, but a broken spirit doeth what? Drieth the bones. So next time, if you're tempted to become angry or depressed or anxious, remember that it cannot help you, it can only hurt you. And choose instead, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, think on what? These things. Think on these things. It very well may save your life. And that, my brothers and my sisters, is wellness worth sharing. Thank you all so much for coming out today, and I want to invite you back tomorrow. And Jamie, do you want to make some announcements and give them the exact times? Yes. Okay, activated. This is a very good question. And bring a lot of your home remedies questions tomorrow. We're going to focus on that specifically. But activated charcoal is hardwood that has been burnt. Hardwood does not have proteins or fats. When you burn proteins and fats, that's when you start to develop the things that are harmful. And in fact, the benzopyrene is probably more related to the fat than anything else. So that's another thing to consider. So a lean cut of a meat would be a healthier choice, but still want to stay away from charbroiled, because that is going to potentially encrust that meat with the benzopyrene. Hey, there's even better choices. I myself, my last meat was a buffalo burger in 2005. So some have even decided to move on. I think I'm properly nourished. I may not look like it, but I've always been skinny. But I eat well, and there are plenty of other things you can eat to get protein and good healthy fats. So you may want to continue in that progression. But know this, the most important thing to focus on, what is it? It is love. It's the love of God. The love of God. And that will keep us going in the right direction. Okay? That's, by the way, some people turn around on the path of disease for various reasons, but ultimately the path of complete restoration. Remember when Jesus would heal people, what would he say? Will thou be made what? Whole. Will thou be made whole. This is God's plan for us. He wants us to be whole. And faithful is he who is calling us, who also will do it. He's going to do it. We just have to be ready to let him, and he'll do it for us. So yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you back again tomorrow.